Hey, look, how are you?
Good morning. How are you?
Good morning. Thank you for coming to the show.
I'm so happy to be here.
I appreciate it. I'm really excited for this episode for a lot of reasons we'll go through in a bit, but we'll start with quotes as most episodes. First quote is failure is inevitable, and it is the people that keeps trying who become successful. Mirai Nagaso. Without strength and courage, it is really hard to perform at the highest levels of international figure skating because you are alone on the ice and you only have 7 minutes over 2 nights to prove yourself. Scott Hamilton. A key reason I came to the computer museum was to build a foundation for the future. And now that we have launched our strategy to 2030, I feel time is right to pass the baton. Dan Lowen, Daniel Lowen. So I brought these quotes because they have relationship with one another to you. Before I dig into the questions, I want the audience to know who is Luke.
Well, hi. So you're trying to capture yourself is in a short, pithy way is hard. But I like to think of a personal brand, and I think my personal brand is to provide positive energy to systems that need it. So in my consulting engagements, I try to help a company achieve their goal. In the context of those consulting engagements, I try to bring positivity, attitude, something fresh, something fun, because typically when a company hires a consultant, they're looking for a fresh perspective. They're looking for someone to help them solve a problem, and you don't want to come in being all kind of depressed or morose or down. You want to have some energy, and so I try to bring that energy, and I try to share that energy with the people I'm working with.
That's amazing. I mean, I met you through taking a class, Profit Streams, and I knew there was something about you. I couldn't know what it was. And when I was reading about your background yesterday, it clicked. You were a figure skater. There was a lot of art in your lecture. There was a lot of executions in terms of experience and operations role. And I really enjoyed not only the class, but I learned so much. I've been in entrepreneurship since 2016, and I can tell you this class just put the puzzle pieces together. We're gonna dig deep in the class, your experience, and all the endeavors you've been through. But I felt since you had a strong belief in what you did, maybe we will start with the belief system. So I'll give you the mic to talk about, the power of belief and how do you think about it?
Yeah, when we were preparing, and for the listeners, you should know that something like this is happening live. But before that, we talk, right? And we want
Yes.
to have a good show for you. And so during our preparation work, we were exploring different themes, and what we settled on, and I thought it was kind of exciting, was this theme of what happens with belief in yourself, belief in others. And so, what I want to talk about is specifically three kinds of belief. And we'll try and relate this to the
Yeah.
entrepreneurial journey. Of course, you're on another entrepreneurial journey, as I also think I am on another entrepreneurial journey with what we're doing with profit streams. So there's the belief in yourself, and we talk a lot about that. Like entrepreneurs have to be strong, you have to believe in yourself. There's the belief in others, a second kind of belief, and that's often common with the co-founders. And one of the reasons why we like uh, founding teams in Silicon Valley is because we know it's hard to be on your own. It's hard to be a solo entrepreneur because there's so many demands. But if you have someone that you're working with and you believe in each other, that's really powerful. However, there's a third kind of belief that I don't think we talk about enough, and that is the belief of someone else in you. And when someone believes in you, I think that that's one of those magical things that can happen. So let's go back in time, and we talk about history. And I want to share, and I invite all of the listeners is I am sharing my own experience to reflect on your experiences in your own life about people who believed in you and times you believed in yourself. So when I was young, 11 years old, they built a skating rink near my house. I grew up in the cold climate outside of Buffalo, New York. So skating rinks were pretty common. And I tried skating, and it was really captivating. And I thought I wanted to do this because it felt pretty cool. But what I didn't tell you in the show prep was my first skating coach actually told me that they didn't think I was very good at it and I should quit. And I was like, no, I want to do this. So I found a different coach. And my second coach told me that while I had a lot of energy and a lot of enthusiasm, it probably wasn't my sport. Maybe I should play baseball or something. I was like, this is nuts. So I found a third coach, and that third coach was fine. We'll train you. But it wasn't until much, much later where I moved from Buffalo to Detroit to do pairs skating. I was doing pair skating now. And the coach that I went to train under, Johnny Johns, he said, I believe in you. I think you can make it to the national championship. And that was my goal. All my friends were going to the national championships. I hadn't been at that level yet. And I really wanted to go at least to that next level. And I remember the feeling I had when Johnny said, it's going to be really hard work, and you have to do what I say, and you have to train the way we train, and you have to do the effort, but I think you can do this. And just having the power of someone saying, I think you can do something, gives you so much strength. It's that belief that someone has in someone else that we don't talk about enough that has so much power.
I love it. You remind me of a story I mentioned before in the podcast. I was in intermediate school, and I loved poetry. And we had an Arabic teacher who was a poet. So I approached him and I said, can you teach me the basics of poetry? And at that time, resources were limited, and it just, me asking him was something that I really was looking for. And his answer was looking at me like this, and I was like, you, poetry? Forget about it. And he walked away. And I bring this story because there's two examples. I did not try more. It was one try. His no broke my heart, and this was it. I moved on. For you, the first no was not a no. He was not the right coach. Second no was he's not the right coach. The third one was absolutely the right coach because it took you to the U.S. National Championship, right?
Yes.
And I love this story because it does tell about skills and leadership is something people acquire through training. And I am glad your third coach said yes, because I felt you were dancing on the course we were taking between the ideas in a beautiful way that grasped not only the aspect of your idea, but it grasped only the operations role you have transformed through multiple companies in a way that the lessons you learned through doing the work. And we'll talk about one of the companies you built from scratch, which is
Conteneo.
Conteneo, yeah. We'll start with something of background. So I know you grew up in Buffalo, New York. What was the effect of Buffalo, New York in and young Luke?
Yeah, so the early part of my life, it was a little challenging. My dad died when I was 4. My mom raised 6 kids on her own. So it was a hard time for any family to lose a parent. And certainly it was a hard time for a woman to raise a family on her own. So there's a certain kind of grit, there's a certain kind of resiliency. We weren't wealthy by any means. We learned how to make do. You learn how to work, if you will. You learn jobs. And I remember starting working when I was 12, and I've pretty much worked 2 jobs my entire life, 1 or 2 jobs my entire life since I was 12, because that's how you make ends meet. I don't have to do that anymore, which is thankful, but I still have I believe, a strong work ethic. Other people would tell you I have a pretty strong work ethic. From there, we did the skating, and then I want to go in Detroit. Not only was I skating, I needed to work, and so I was working part-time. And I got my first job in the tech industry, my first significant job, writing software for an auto parts company. And it was a job that was, in a sense, given to me. It wasn't really earned. I had been doing some programming. I took some programming classes in high school, and I had an associate's degree, which in America is a 2-year degree from a community college. And so I had just a little bit of training. and I got my first job writing a database for a parts supplier. And the reason I bring that up is because I was talking about what happens when someone believes in you. Well, sometimes the belief, like the coach in Detroit, was a bit earned because I had some history with skating, but with this first job, it's an unearned belief. The people who hired me, they knew I was skating. They were going to help out with skating. They knew they needed the job done, but they weren't sure I could do it. And that happens in your career. Sometimes people will support you or believe in you when it's earned. That could be an example in the founding community. Some entrepreneur who has significant success, they get easy funding from VCs the next time around because the VCs are like, oh, well, they've earned this belief system because they've somehow demonstrated success. Therefore, we believe in them. And then there's, of course, the funding the first time around where you can frame funding in a company as a form of belief. The investors believe in you as the entrepreneur. The investors believe that your background is going to make money. And of course, there's more than economics in the decision, right? The investors believe that you're going to make them a profit, otherwise they wouldn't put their money in your company. But they also have the belief that you're the right founder or founding team to get that done. Sometimes that's earned because you have a prior track record of success, and sometimes it's given. And that's when it can be really exciting and really powerful when the investors are helping or believing in you, even if you haven't, quote unquote, proven your success yet.
I was attending the Baker Institute, which is a think tank at Rice University. There was U.S. General Tim Mattias, and actually, surprisingly enough, I saw him at the hotel a few weeks ago. So I walked into him, and I remember an event, this was about 4 or 5 years ago. He talked about the power of how they organize teams in the military. And it's all about a belief system. So you need to believe you're going to competition, a challenge, where every single member of the team needs to believe of their own abilities to execute. And I just love how beautifully you say it, because a lot of jobs today, they always ask, what's your experience? Like, what about the people who don't have an experience? And this will bring me to my next question, which is mentorship and sponsorship. How they affected your life, and what should you tell our listeners in terms of how do they approach these to find the right mentor or the right sponsor?
I didn't understand the power of having a mentor or a sponsor, I think, in the professional world until I worked for, the best manager I've ever worked for was a guy named Vern Olson at Electronic Data Systems. And I realized now that I'm older that he was mentoring me, he was supporting me, but he believed in me and he gave me a break, if you will. He gave me that job that helped me grow in my career, and he supported me in so many other ways. I think that that's a very important element of paying it forward. And so if you have benefited from someone mentoring or believing in you, you need to pay it forward. And I try to do that in the companies I've founded, like Conteneo or Applied Frameworks, where we will bring in interns explicitly, and we will give opportunities to interns. Because if you don't give them an opportunity, if you don't give young people an opportunity, they're just not going to have that chance. Or even older people, but typically interns are younger. Yeah. They're starting their career. And so I think that this notion of believing in others is when you've had a mentor, you want to find a way to pay it forward. Now, not every mentor is good and not every experience is good. So I think it's also, as you get older, you start to be more discerning about who you want to work with and how you want to work and who you take advice from. So in my current company, we have a couple of advisors, but those advisors were carefully vetted and chosen because we know what we're looking for in terms of helping our company grow. And we want to make sure that the advice that we're getting is advice that is relevant to what we need, and it fills in our experience, because your experience changes over time, and the advice and the areas of growth that you need are going to change over time.
I absolutely agree. And let me tie this to perseverance and goals and resilience. I know a lot of companies sometimes, if they know you have a sports or in a team, they love those hires, especially sales. What was the effect of maybe let's give the audience a little bit of history of the championships you won and
Sure.
how long you've played for. How has that impacted your life in the workspace space and family space, and its effect on companies?
Sure. So I started skating when I was 11. I stopped when I was 24. So it was quite a number of years. I, over time, was the United States National Junior Pairs Figure Skating Champion in 1985. And the distinction between the junior and the senior is the senior level is where you would go to the world championships or the international competitions. So once you win the junior championships, of course, you graduate to the senior level. And in the senior level, or you can graduate other ways. You don't have to win, but when you win the juniors, you actually have to move to the seniors. So you can't do any better. So in the senior level, we were members of the international team, made it to 8th in the U.S., and we were on what is now the ISU circuit. And so you asked about grit and resilience, and I think those are all there, right? I mean, those are all part of it. But the reality is we love to skate. We love the act of doing the sport. And I think that in the entrepreneurial journey, people forget that hard work is a gift. And working on a job or working on a company that you're a founder of or an early employee of, that's a gift. You get the chance to do something you love, trying to build something cool with presumably people that you care about and respect, right? You should respect the people that you're working with at your job. And so that the joy of the activity has to come through to get the benefit of the outcome, because the outcome of a entrepreneurial journey is uncertain. Just like in skating. I mean, one year was really tough because about a month before the national championships, I got an injury and I couldn't quite skate my best. We did the best we could, but there's an injury and it happens. And in many sports, you get one shot, like at the Olympics that just played. You have your race and that's it. You've trained years and you get it. That's it. In business, fortunately, we typically get more than one shot. Now, you mentioned also the idea of how does sports or how does that activity affect your business career? Well, I think in one sense, just being physically active helps you deal with the stress of being an entrepreneur. So I always encourage people, whether or not they have an extreme sports background like I did, no matter what your sports background, you want to go for a walk, right? Just about anyone can, take a walk or be outside, do things that restore your health, eat reasonably well. It's a little harder in America because of the fast food industry, et cetera. But you want to have good food in your body, try to get the right sleep. I mean, all the platitudes you hear about, but they all matter. And then the last thing that you mentioned was this notion of people in the company, if they have some form of a background in sports. I admit, I think that that's a plus on a resume. I find that people who have worked or who have a sports background, they tend to have a discipline about how they go to work. And discipline is, consistency and doing the things that you need to do to be successful are really critical. And sometimes, admittedly, sometimes skating wasn't joyful. Sometimes it felt like a job, like, oh, I got to go, practice. And sometimes for an entrepreneur, picking up the phone is like, oh, I got to make a sales call. That's not always joyful. But if you have that discipline, you do the work so that you can have the success.
Amazing. I recall a memory in terms of skating. I remember early 90s, maybe mid 90s, I was in Dubai, and there was an ice rink, and in the Middle East, this is something great. So in my imagination, there was, I'm gonna go there, I'm gonna spin, and it's gonna be great. So I put my foot in the ice rink, and the next thing I know is my eyes looking up, and I am on my back. And I never done it again. So my question is, sometimes in entrepreneurship or in life, the hardest thing is the first step.
Right.
So I want to talk about your first step in your career, pulling cables at EDS.
Yes.
Let's talk about that experience and maybe follow on to today's journey.
Yeah, so my first like real kind of job that got me going was working at a very big company, Electronic Data Systems, and that was in Detroit, Michigan. And EDS at the time had these huge data centers, kind of like what we have right now, but they were different because they were primarily mainframe, whereas the data centers we have now are more racks of servers that are doing AI or other things. But the concept is similar in the sense that there's a special building and it's got special power. Well, there's in a data center, there's raised floor. And so there's a reinforced concrete pad. There's about a 1 meter space where there's poles. And then on top of the space, there's these insulated tiles. And the air conditioning goes down into the floor. And that's where all the cables run. And then the cool air comes up. So my first job at EDS was crawling underneath the raised tile to cable computers and connect them and do networking. So I was what we would call a floor grub. And there's a lot of people who say, I worked my way from the ground up. And I'm like, yeah, I worked my way from literally beneath the ground up at EDS. And I spent 10 years at EDS, but I worked my way from the ground up. But I had this really strong foundation of doing the work that was needed. And I would go around, I remember kind of earning my way up because people would say, hey, can you do this? And I'd say, sure. Well, I wouldn't know how to do it, but I would then go ask someone else for help like you did. I'd say, hey, can you help me? And at that time, the culture of EDS was this really remarkable place where people just helped each other. And I learned that a lot of the EDS people were ex-military people. The early employees, and the culture, you talked about the culture of teamwork and the culture of belief in each other. They had that at EDS, and I would go and I would say yes to the crazy requests. I didn't know how to do them. I'd go ask for help, and someone would say, oh, yeah, let me show you how to do that. And so, person A would ask me to do something, person B would help me get it done. And then person A would think, wow, this guy just gets stuff done. And I'd say, well, I had help from this other person. So, because you want to give credit where credit's due. But the higher level point was in a big company, and there's strengths and weaknesses to big and small companies. But in a big company, I spent 10 years there, and I had 10 different jobs in 10 years, 10 different really formative things to do and formative experiences. And then going back to my great boss, Vern, during some of my work at EDS, I got a lucky break to build expert systems, which was the early form of AI in the 80s. Now AI has a different flavor, but we did artificial intelligence in the form of expert systems in the mid 80s. And I was working with the EDS R&D team, and I was still programming, but I didn't have a degree, and I'm working with PhDs, and I thought, oh, this is really cool, and I want to get my degree. I didn't really, at that time, you could argue I didn't need a degree, but I wanted a degree. And I said to my boss, I'm going to leave EDS because I want to go pursue a degree. And he said, no, don't leave EDS. And he structured a deal which was amazing. He structured a deal where EDS paid for my degree, and then I agreed that every year they paid, I would work a year. So it was kind of a, we'll invest in you, and then we'll get a return in from that investment. And I said, okay. And he said, there's 3 conditions. We pick the school, we pick the degree, and you work for us. And I said, okay, where am I going to school? What degree am I getting? He said, you're going to go to the University of Michigan, and you're going to get a computer engineering degree. And I said, okay. So I did. And then there was this other kind of breaking point in life, opportunity. When I went to school, at Michigan, they were, as you can imagine, very prestigious university. And they're like, well, we don't care what you did in the real world. You have to take the introductory programming classes. And I'm like, I don't need an introductory programming class. But the guy who was teaching it was this amazing, dynamic professor, Elliot Soloway. And I went up to him and on the first day of class, I said, hey, I don't need to take introductory Pascal. I've been working. He's like, yeah, you look a little older. And I said, is there any way I can get out of the class? He said, well, I'm starting a research lab in artificial intelligence on how programmers program, and I have some prototype code written in Lisp on a Mac. He said, can you code Lisp on a Mac? And I'm like, I don't know what Lisp is, and I've never used a Mac, but I can code it, which is the belief in yourself part of it. And he said, great, come on board, join the lab. And so I learned Lisp, and I learned how to program on the Mac, and I did 5 years of work with Elliot, some pretty groundbreaking work at the time on how programmers program and teaching programming. But that's, again, one of those kind of rare times where you believe in yourself, someone takes a flyer on you, literally, like they believe in you, and then you start to develop the relationship where you've earned a little bit, and then you get more responsibility, and you earn and you grow. And that was really amazing too.
Looks like you enjoyed the moment. You weren't planning what I'm gonna do next year, and I like the idea of saying yes and figuring it out later. And this is maybe something.
My wife would say this is why we have 4 kids.
So it comes to mind just how you're graceful in saying, okay, I can't figure things out, but I'm going to learn along the way, and I'm going to enjoy it. So what I mean by this is having a team members and sharing your knowledge is not about only confidence in what you have, but in your vision that by sharing the knowledge and the people around you, you can build stronger teams and the whole ecosystem will flourish. So I want to talk about the vision of you moving with the EDS to the Bay Area, and maybe I'll
So there's a lot of things there. So I start working for EDS in Detroit. I go to Michigan, and then I get an opportunity to move to Texas for managing a subsidiary of EDS that did credit card processing in the trucking industry.
I'm guessing their headquarters was in Plano, Texas.
Yes,
right?
this is the EDS in Plano, Texas, which is a very built-up city. But when I started working there, there was literally, that was the only thing there, was the EDS headquarters.
Oh, wow.
I was there at the groundbreaking of the facility, and there was just like this massive flat area. No other headquarters were there. They start to build the big Plano complex, and it was really pretty fun to be a part of. So I go to work for EDS, and I'm in Texas, and I start to really get drawn into personal computers and object-oriented programming and what that can do. And EDS at the time was still a mainframe. We process bank transactions, or we process checks, or we do healthcare systems for states like Medicare and Medicaid. And I wasn't as interested in this, so I ended up joining a very small firm, which was quite a big shock, called ObjectSpace. And ObjectSpace did training, consulting, and products around C++ and Smalltalk, which were really the big languages at that time of technology. Now we have different languages, but C++ is still a prominent language. Smalltalk, not as much. And I ran the training department. So that's where I was able to take my performing skills of figure skating to be engaging as an instructor. And I started to really learn how to be an educator, how to design classes so that adults could learn. I learned a lot about adult learning theory. Hopefully you experienced that in our class, which is a combination of how do you stay engaging for adults? How do you create experiences that are relevant to them? How do you create and design material that helps them accomplish their goals? That's all wrapped up into what I'm doing now. And part of the reason I got good at it was practice. I've now taught more than 25,000 people something in my career. And when you practice something like that long enough, when you've been around the world teaching classes and you start to see the commonality of humanity in terms of how we learn and our desires and our aspirations, you start to really bring that together. Now I'm skipping a few steps. So after I left EDS, I joined Object Space, and I'm doing training, and then I just got itchy to build products. I was like, okay, I'm doing all this consulting, I'm doing all this training, but I want to build stuff again. My best friend, Dan, who I went to school with and worked at EDS with, he made a big, bold move after he graduated from school, because Sun was hiring and growing crazy in the mid 90s, and he had already moved to the Bay Area, and he said a note, you got to come to the Bay Area. There's this crazy energy happening. It's the .com era. So I moved to the Bay Area in 96, and I worked at a company called Origin Systems, and we created a breakthrough product in a very kind of unglamorous area, which was in patent portfolio management. So we were the first company to create a patent data warehouse solution to mine and analyze patent data. And what I learned in that process was, I think it was really the first time that I saw, I knew EDS served businesses, but it was so big I didn't see kind of how it got there. By joining Origin, I was able to see, and moving to the Bay Area, I was able to see what it was like to get venture capital funding. So Daniel Lewin was our CEO, Kevin Rivette and Irv Rappaport were the founders. And Daniel had this amazing ability to frame our story and raise capital. We had other really prominent leaders. David Puglia headed marketing and did strategy on how we get our name into the market. And a guy named Steve Dodds did sales. And I had engineering and product. And we had a team that was really tight, and it worked really well together. And Origin, I got to see like the power of B2B. And what's really exciting about B2B is there's so many companies out there that are doing so many interesting things in the B2B space. I met you through the Tech Founders Program, and we had 22 startups a week ago learning profit streams, and all of them have interesting ideas, and most of them were B2B, right? Because there's this creativity going on right now about how do we serve companies. I think one of the companies that was really interesting, and I hope they succeed, is the guy who's creating the marketplace for junkyards and helping people find parts more effectively and kind of unlocking all the value of those hidden assets.
Yeah. We have two students. Ahmed was doing the Utopia.
Yes.
And we had Abdul Razzaq, who had this junkyard idea almost overlapping, because Ahmed already actually has, I think he's raising seed money, and he exited already from a company called TAM, which was going public last year. But I really enjoyed every single student in the group. Everybody has a great project, and we learned a lot from each other. This will bring me to a question about Daniel Lewin. I was researching, and apparently he used to be at Apple.
Yes.
In the first 5 years of the 80s. I know you spoke great of him. What was his impact in your growth?
Well, I think, so Daniel was an interesting relationship, because I don't, like with Vern, I appreciated what Vern was doing for me in real time, and with Elliot, I could see that. With Daniel, his influence, I don't think I appreciated it until I tried to do it on my own. And what I mean by that is, when I joined Origin, Daniel was a great CEO, but he really was effective at managing our board, managing investors, securing money. He made sure that we had as much money as we needed to be successful. So I was like, oh, how hard can that be? He's in Silicon Valley. He knows everyone in Silicon Valley. He was on the Mac team. He just asked for money like the other entrepreneurs, and he gets it. Well, so I knew what he was doing was important, but I don't think I really appreciated all that he did until I formed Conteneo, and I'm starting to try and raise funds to build my own software company. And all I get is no. And I'm like, you guys got to be kidding me. I was at Origin. I had a successful consulting firm, applied frameworks before I started Conteneo. I have a successful book that we're building on. I have customers who've indicated their interest, and all the VCs just kept saying no, no, no for any number of reasons. And then it hit me really hard in terms of realization, like, wow, what Daniel did wasn't easy. It was really hard, and he was really good at it. And I remember, Daniel, if you ever listen to this, I hope I told you that. And if not, I'll say it again now. That's what I learned in retrospect. And going back to Conteneo, we never did get VC funding. I never, and I shouldn't say we, because I was the one, it was really on me. I was never able to convince investors, either seed investors or early stage investors, that we should get funding. But I had a different belief system. Let's go back to the belief system. I had a belief that this company would work because I had a successful book, Innovation Games, and that book had created a following, and I knew people were using these techniques that I created in person, and many of them had requested an online version. So I knew there was this latent demand, and I started using services to fund developers. And this is an atypical path, and it's actually it's an unusually hard path to start as a services company and become a product company, because the service delivery people don't like to fund developers because it detracts from their salary, et cetera, et cetera. It's a hard transition. But we had a team who wanted to do that transition. So we took our services revenue, we built a product company, and we customer funded it. And we did that for the first, say, 5 years. And then almost when we didn't need funding, but we could still be valuable, we got our first angel investment from a gentleman named Vern Harnish, who wrote some amazing books for companies. And I recommend his work for every company. It's the book Scaling Up, and it's how to actually take a book.
I just bought that book last week.
So Vern's a fantastic person. He is an amazing guy. And I met him at a conference. I was in Berlin. Alex Osterwalder of the Business Model Canvas had asked me to speak at his conference, and Alex and I are friends. And at that conference, I met Vern, and Vern loved my talk so much. He's like, what you're doing is amazing. Are you looking for investors? I said, well, no, we're not anymore. And he said, well, would you take an investment if someone offered? I said, sure, it's going to help me grow, but I'm not looking for it. He's like, well, I'm willing to invest. And right there on the spot, just meeting him after my talk, we agreed to an investment, and like a handshake. And then it closed 6 weeks later. So he's a great guy. And then we ended up building out Conteneo and then selling it. And it was a great transaction.
This was at Conteneo.
Yeah, this was at Conteneo.
There was so much stuff, but before I do anything, I want to show the audience. This is Innovation Games. Tell the people why they should read this.
Well, they should read this because this is a set of games, and it was the first book in the serious games movement, or one of the first books in the serious games movement, where what we're trying to do is understand our customer needs through collaborative play. So rather than doing a survey, which we all know when we take a survey, it can be am I going to really get the right results? Or an interview. And interviews are fantastic, and you should be doing interviews. But interviews do require a little bit of training. They do require a little bit of interview skill to get the right insights. So what I tried to do in this approach was to create some very easy to apply ways to collaborate with your customers and really understand their needs through this process. So for entrepreneurs who are looking to better understand customer needs, and of course in this context, when I say entrepreneur, I mean people who are building something new. It could be building something new as a company or building a new product within an existing company. Innovation games are a fantastic way to understand your customers. Since I wrote the book, the games have been adapted to internal use within companies. And so you'll see them in the Agile community in portfolio management with participatory budgeting. You'll see them in software development with retrospectives. You'll see them in product management with road mapping, etc. So the original intention was you played the game with customers. Since then, it's blossomed into both internal and external use. And that was a really fun process and a really fun sequence. And that company, Conteneo, was acquired by Scaled Agile, and another life-changing event, another person who really saw a vision beyond even what I think I saw was Dean Leffingwell, who was the founder of Scaled Agile. And he's a serial entrepreneur, incredibly successful. And I started working with Dean and his team in 2018, and we built trust and we built relationships. And then in the at the end of 2018, I started working with them in February, but in December, he's like, "Hey, what are you going to do with Conteneo?" And I said, "Well, I intend to sell it as soon as I find a buyer." And he said, "Well, would you sell it to us?" And I'm like, "Absolutely." And he said, "How much would you sell it for?" And I said, "This amount of money, and here's some of the preferences that we have." And I remember we were at dinner, and Dean said, "That's a really fair price." And I said, "Yeah." And I think that that's one of the things that continues to build trust. We know in behavioral economics, we tend to believe things that we create are more valuable than they are. And they've proven this time and time again. So as an entrepreneur, even though it can be hard, you have to have a very sober and rational assessment of how much your business is worth. So you build it with your heart, but you value it with your head. And so the deal closed, and that was a fantastic outcome for myself and for my team. And then I stayed there a year, and we kind of completed everything that we needed to complete, and it was time for the next company. And that was a company called First Root. Now, at this time, I wanted to get some funding and build a company. And of course, what I said earlier now comes into play. Investors look at me and go, "Oh, you've sold a company. You've bootstrapped a company. It's easier to raise some funding." So we raised a bit of money, and we were building an ed tech solution to help children learn financial literacy and civic engagement. We wanted to promote getting involved in communities, getting involved in their school, because Western democracy is facing some threats. And we wanted to promote voting, we wanted to promote civic engagement. And unfortunately, my timing was awful. Starting an ed tech company and then having COVID decimate school spending, school interaction. So we couldn't hold on long enough to get past COVID, and the company ran out of money and failed. And sometimes I think entrepreneurs, we work really hard, but sometimes it's timing, and sometimes it's a bit of luck. Bill Gross from Idea Lab did a study of several hundred startups, and he wanted to try and find what was the root of their success. And one of the things he found was that the number one influence on a startup is timing. Are you in the right place at the right time with the right technology? And I think we had a great idea, and I think we had a great app, and people loved using it. But the timing was that teachers were so focused on how do they help their kids with COVID. Parents and families were so focused on COVID. There was just no way to absorb a new idea. Maybe it comes back in the future, maybe not. I don't know. But after First Root, I joined Applied Frameworks, and Jason and I said, what is really needed next in the world of product management? We've got a lot of people focusing on process. We've got people saying, you have to have a great vision, you have to be inspired, and of course you need all that. But what we also need is we need to actually make money at our startups. We need to have a sustainable profit to have a sustainable business. And what we decided was that there were a lot of books about pricing, but they were old and dull and boring, and they were about pricing guitars and gaskets in cars, and menu items in restaurants. And what we really need in our world is a book that is specifically designed for how to price and design a monetization system for software-enabled solutions. And that's what we sat down to write. And then the challenge that I gave myself, because you want to challenge yourself to grow, is I wanted to write a beautiful book. I wanted it to not just have great content, I wanted it to be beautiful. So Jason and I wrote the book by hand, and I mean by hand, paper and pencil, photographed every single page, sent it to our full-time designer, Federico Gonzalez, Fede, and Fede designed a beautiful book. So now we have the content, but we have it in a form that's accessible for modern entrepreneurs like you who don't want to be bored to death by reading so much blah, blah, blah text written by a boomer, from 1950 or 60. We want something fresh, and we want something new, and we want something specifically for software.
It remind me of a story Steve Jobs talked about when he was at Reed College and dropped out. He was able to attend classes that he couldn't because his major was in fall-in, so he attended the calligraphy class.
Right.
And this is why, as he says, the Windows copied the Mac, and we have beautiful typography in both. Now, I want to show the audience the book. So the book you're talking about is this, right? So the Software Profit Streams. It's a beautiful book. Really good thought of, and I highly recommend. Now,
this is what you and the other entrepreneurs went through.
Yes.
In applying it.
And definitely attending your class does not substitute for the book, but the book is absolutely a great reference. And, chapters are divided by color, and it's well organized. Now, for the sake of time, I know there's a few things I want to touch upon for what you mentioned, which is at Origin, you were head of engineering.
Yes.
And
head of engineering and product. So
and for reference for people, that at that time, 4 terabyte storage cost about $4 million.
Oh yeah. So we were building the first ever patent data warehouse, and we needed to bring all of the patent data, which is both text and images. Yeah, and to give the readers a reference, because it's kind of fun to look at technology and how it improves and how the costs drop. It's really fun. But at the time, we built one of the biggest data warehouses and this was Microsoft Windows 3.1 and SQL Server 7. So we were pushing the boundaries of these technologies way harder than what they imagined. And to put it in reference, we had a 5 terabyte data warehouse, and the combination of disk storage and tape storage, because at that time even the disk was too much. So we had a mechanical tape machine where some of the data was on tape, and you would access a file. And it wasn't instant. It would take, up to 5 minutes to get the file that you accessed, but that was $4 million, which is why we needed Daniel to go get VC funding. Now, you see that now where companies are investing in the AI chips, right? They're spending literally hundreds of millions to billions of dollars in AI chips, because at the foundation of many of our new companies are hardware-based technological innovation. And in the case of AI, the hardware is the specialized graphics processing units that enable AI algorithms to run efficiently.
It's amazing how in your lifetime, I remember there was a computer science consultant I worked with in Houston. He said when the 128 megabyte, it was like this big. But storage, I mean, you can walk to Best Buy today and get a 6 terabyte like this big for $250.
Yeah.
But it's amazing how technology have come so far. Now, before I move away from the career,
so for the listeners, I have gray hair.
When you told me earlier and spoke about your experience, and I realized how long you've been in industry, I did not believe it. Maybe we'll talk about that segment and what is the secret. But one more experience. I'm not sure, there was a Qualcomm in your experience we didn't talk about.
Yes. So a gap in the story was in 2000. I had formed a company in the height of the dot bomb era. And again, my timing was bad. That company failed. And so I started consulting for a VC in a company called Preview Systems. And that company was a company that did try before you buy software. So we would do digital rights management and protection for software applications. And this was way back in 2000, 2001, where you would get a CD and you could try Photoshop. And then after 30 days, Photoshop, if you didn't buy it, would stop working.
I remember that. Okay.
We did all that technology.
Interesting.
Well, that company wasn't doing very well. It was a dot bomb. It had been valued too quickly and went public too quickly, and it wasn't doing very well. And we ended up preparing it for sale, and I was brought in to do the turnaround and help prepare for sale. So I had to do the unenviable things of laying off a bunch of people because the engineering staff was they overhired. And that's a common mistake that startups make, is they get some funding and then they hire faster than they need to. I've done that a couple of times in my own career, is every now and then I've maybe hired a little faster than I should have, and then you have to go through the painful layoff. So there's a phrase in Silicon Valley that first-time founders brag about how many employees they have, and second-time founders brag about how few employees they have. So you learn to be more careful. Anyway, we packaged that company and we sold it to an Israeli company, Aladdin Knowledge Systems, that did software DRM, and I ended up becoming VP of Engineering and Product Management for Aladdin in the software digital rights management space. And then from there, I got promoted into VP of US Business Development. And I learned a lot about how to structure deals, how to manage contracts, how to leverage technology in that process. But then the first Bush decided to go to war. We won't comment too much about that. But my wife and I, and at this time, I met the most important person in my life, my wife, Jenna. We had two small kids, and we decided that traveling in the Middle East in a potential time of war wasn't the best choice for the family. So I left Aladdin, and I didn't have a job, and I needed money because I have kids and a mortgage. So I sent an email to 40 friends saying, hey, I'm now a consultant, whatever, I'm now a consultant, whatever that means. Someone hire me. And I got a phone call about a half an hour later from a friend at Qualcomm. And I had worked with him. His name is Glenn Spangenberg. I worked with Glenn at EDS, and he said, hey, I'm at Qualcomm. I'm a general manager there, a VP, and we acquired a company, and we could use your help in integrating that technology in that company into Qualcomm. So I ended up spending 5 years consulting at Qualcomm in the trucking industry. And that was a lot of fun, and that was my start to consulting, which, again, gives a great foundation. In this case, that belief in someone else was based on working together at EDS. And so going back to the belief system, I believed I could be a good consultant. And through our shared experience, Glenn believed that my skills and background was helpful to Qualcomm at that time, and it turned out to be.
It looks like, when you mentioned Jenna and how she is the best thing that ever happened in her life. My next section is about how do you stay grounded and connected to your personal identity, the fast-paced world of innovation. But let us talk about the family in the context of why this is the best thing ever happened to you.
Well, love is the best thing that happens to people, right? Yeah. And so we've been married now for more than 25 years. And of course, we've had our ups and downs, like any relationship does. But we've had this foundation of belief in each other. And I think in terms of grounding and belief systems, my wife is very grounded herself. She is not materialistic. So I remember at times when my consulting firm would be growing, or when I was working at Conteneo, and I'd say, hey, we're growing. I could take home more salary. And I remember one time Jenna said, well, why? I said, well, because we have more money. She goes, well, but we don't need more money right now. We have our life. We don't need to raise our standard of living. We don't need to change anything we're doing. We're doing fine. And then she said, could that money help grow the company? And I said, well, yeah. I said, any dime that we don't take, I'm going to put back into the business. She goes, well, do that, because the bigger payout, the bigger benefit for us is if you were ever to sell the company. And we don't know if there's going to be an up or a down coming. So maybe we should just put some of that money in the bank for the company, right? So that you can pay salaries and have your employees have more stable jobs. And so I think the grounding, there's many ways to be grounded. One form of grounding is to have a partner, and my partner is my wife, and she's not materialistic, and she has helped keep me grounded, if you will, and because it's easy in Silicon Valley, especially when you're a founder, to get wrapped up in things that don't matter, like the car you drive or things like that. She's a fantastic mother, and she's helped raise a family so that when I needed to travel, I could travel because there was someone at home who had the kids. And even when she's had concerns or, in a sense, doubts, like I remember when I started First Root, I said, here's the plan for First Root. It's this ed tech company. And I remember Jenna saying, I love the idea, but I don't know if it's going to work. And here's my concerns, and she outlined several business model issues. And I said, okay, I think I can address those. She goes, yeah, but that's a lot to address. And I'm not sure this is going to happen. And so I think the other thing that keeps people grounded is I've said I love my wife, which of course I do, but I also find her one of the most fascinating and interesting people I know. And what I mean by that is when I have something I want to review with someone, an idea or like, how might this work? I will ask her, because like I did with First Root, I was like, man, I want to do this. And she's like, I'm not so sure. And when I came to her with profit streams, I'm like, okay, I got this new idea for this new book with Jason. And she's like, yeah, that sounds like a really good idea. And it's not like she's some high-powered entrepreneur, right? But she's just an incredibly smart human. And she just said, yeah, that sounds like a better idea than First Root because of these reasons. And, she knows business, and she knows the world of business, et cetera. So I think and that's the ultimate person that you have in your life, right? The person who is that belief in someone else. Going back to belief, is that through all of these ups and downs, I've always known that I've had her support and her belief.
When you were talking about all of this, I imagined conversation at the dinner table with the kids. So I am interested in that question because, you come from humble backgrounds. You worked your way to Silicon Valley. You're an accomplished entrepreneur, and you have a family. How was dinner table conversations with the kids? Like, do you run a project or where everybody in the meeting need to listen, or how's that?
Well,
works?
so dinners were very open and very direct, and we would talk about a lot of things. Unlike a lot of my friends, our kids worked. Like when they were 15, they got a job. And now, did they need to have a job? Of course not. I mean, my wife and I were doing well enough that, they quote unquote didn't need to work. But I started to see what was happening to friends of mine whose kids didn't have a work ethic like I wanted to have, and my wife had. She grew up in the Midwest, and so our kids have worked. And when I was growing up, we didn't really talk about money, but I don't think that's because my mom was avoiding it. It's because I don't think she was ever educated in money. Mm-hmm. And so as you become an entrepreneur, as you know, all entrepreneurs have to learn how to manage money, right? You're managing a spreadsheet. You're looking at your cash flow. You understand the difference between profit and cash flow. You're managing your payroll. You're thinking about, and we would talk about this at the family dinner. Dinner table, and we would talk. I remember one time one of my kids, my youngest, wanted to sell dog biscuits at the park. So I sat down and said, okay, if you're going to sell dog biscuits, you're going to have to buy the ingredients from mom and dad, and here's how much the flour and the peanut butter costs. And now you know how much it costs. So now you have to mark up the biscuits to sell them. And so, like so many entrepreneurs, my kids had a taste of entrepreneurship. They sold lemonade. They had jobs. They've worked freelance. They've worked for me in my company. And you and I haven't talked about this, but I also have a nonprofit that promotes positive civic engagement. It's called Every Voice Engaged, because we want every voice engaged in their government. And my kids at times would help out on our events, and I'd schlep them to the events, and they'd help set up the events. And they're like, Dad, we're not getting paid. And I'm like, right, because not everything you do in life should be done for money. There are things that you should do to give back to society, to give back to community. So you can't have your whole life be driven by how much money every single thing is going to give you. And there was a joke at times where my wife, I'd say, oh, I got this new project. And she'd be like, well, is this one paid or is this one pro bono? And I'd be like, oh, this one's pro bono. And she's like, oh, okay. But the kids heard that at dinner table, and we would talk about business. We would talk about how things were going, sometimes well and sometimes not so well, but the kids knew. And I think that that's healthy. I think adults need to talk about money, entrepreneurship. People need to have these conversations in front of their family. Even if and none of my kids are entrepreneurs. Three of the four kids for sure do not want to be entrepreneurs. One's a scientist. He's like, Dad, I want to do math and chemistry. Okay. The other one is in media and the media arts, and the oldest is moving into psychology, and the youngest is doing social work. Although I'm not sure that social work will be the long term. If any one of them could be an entrepreneur, it's likely her.
Thanks for sharing the story. Absolutely amazing. And it reminded me of my first episode I did in the show. It was with Tom Coles. Tom was the founding director of Leadership Institute at West Point, but he also was founding director at John Doerr Institute of New Leaders at Rice University. And he talked about, we were talking about economics and Adam Smith, and he talked about an article he read the week before we recorded, which was there was fuss in the media about the CEO of a largest bank in the U.S. getting paid $80 million payoffs, and he said in the military, we teach leadership of values from the inside out. And this is exactly when your son said, or your daughter said, we're not getting paid for this, and this value came out. I think this is a pendulum into the behavior of humans. Is we have tendencies and biases, and leadership sometimes comes from the inside towards things without pay, because as Tom says, leadership with payment doesn't really work because the incentive is not right.
Right.
And maybe this touches in the entrepreneurship ecosystem in AI when we talk about human-centered AI. Since we're close to Stanford AI at the Gates School of Computer Science. But this moves us to really an important question, since we're talking about ethics, is have you ever encountered a situation where you had to choose between your moral compass and professional obligations, and how did this decision impact you?
Yeah. I don't want to. First, I don't want to answer in a way that suggests that I'm some kind of morally perfect human, or I've never made mistakes, because I don't think that's true. And I also recognize that you serve a global audience in your podcast, and the concepts of morals are based on our cultural values and how we were raised in a larger society. So with all of those things said, I'll talk about a very specific example. We were at Conteneo, the collaboration platform that we built. And one of the things that we did at Conteneo was everything that you did in our platform was tracked as a discrete event. And the technical behind the scenes on this is that we were writing our platform in a programming language called Scala, which was super high performance if you follow the event streaming model and event sourcing, which means, like, for example, to put it in practical terms, like if you clicked on something, it was an event sent to the server. We applied the event to the shared collaboration space and then distributed the updates. So that's now, at the time we did that, it was a little bit of a breakthrough, but now it's accepted for collaborative editing as to be, one of the best ways to structure these high-performing systems. Well, the benefit of the event stream is that I had a perfect log of the event sequences, and our system could be audited to be a guaranteed source of truth, because as the events would come in, we would serialize them, but we would also hash them with an MD5 hash, which, for those of you who are technical, what that means is it doesn't prevent people from altering the source data, but it allows us to detect if the source data was altered. So if you typed in hello, we'd hash it. If someone else came along and edited the data to change the outcome to say goodbye, we would be able to detect that this was edited in violation of the original. We couldn't maybe determine what the original was, but we could say, look, this data is bad or suspect. Well, we were working for a large company, and they did a trial of our software, and they really liked it. However, one of their leaders was not aligned with the same values that you or I might have, and they came to me, and that leader said, hey, look, I know we have this collaborative outcome, and when we use it for budgeting, I don't know if I'm always going to get the result I want. So I want to be able to change the data so I can get the want. And I said, well, and I explained, like, you can't do this. This is how our system's designed. And he said, or well, not he, but they, because it was, I don't want to be gender. They said, well, I will write you a check so that you can make that an option, and I want it turned off for my company. And I said, I'm not going to do that. And he said, they said, this check is a lot of money, and I will guarantee a contract that will help your company succeed. I said, I understand that, but we're not going to do that.
Standing up.
And he pulled the contract and never talked to me again. And I was okay with that. And there was I remember coming home and sitting down at the dinner table and saying, hey, Dad just turned away a company changing amount of money, and here's why. That was a morally hard decision, but to this day I felt it was the right decision, because it would have, first, and when you're a parent and when you have a strong partner, is that who they want to live with, right? I mean, now, I also read an article 2 days ago about Ruth Madoff, which was Bernie Madoff's wife, the guy who did the biggest Ponzi scheme ever. And it turns out she knew what was going on because she ran the books. So again, I didn't make the choice to change the software. Someone else might have. And I don't want to be overly judgmental or negative. It was just the choice that I felt was right. And I think that that's part of, like, you imagine if your life was lived transparently. Imagine if your browser history was public to the world. Imagine if the source code you wrote was always open source. Imagine if someone could find anything about you. How would you make choices? How would you live? Would you feel comfortable that people would know that those are the choices? And like I said, I don't want to sound like I'm perfect, because I don't think I've made perfect choices every time, but you strive for this as much as you can.
You reminded me of a case with the story you mentioned about Alan Greenspan. So for those who don't know, Alan Greenspan have invested a lot of money in Madoff, and at that time he was Federal Bank Reserve president. And to me was an eye-opening for many cases, which is no expert on earth can do and take all decisions the right way, especially with somebody like Alan Greenspan investing with Madoff. But I want to end, so I have one more question, which is the identity capital question. But before that, I want to end with this. if I miss anything, feel free to mention. But if after you do that, let's do the weasel story
Oh, sure.
and just so
And we
people
and we have
understand.
to put a
Yeah.
link in the show notes,
Yes,
or
yes,
share them.
yes, we'll do.
Okay, so for the listeners, when we were doing our class last week with the entrepreneurs, we were talking about commitment and focus. And one of the entrepreneurs said, look, I want to be B2B to B. I want to go B2B and B2C and B2B to BC. And I was something like that. And I was like, whoa, wait a minute. That's too much. I said, you can't start. I said, you can't, and this is true for all entrepreneurs listening. You can't model your small company on how big companies are structured, because they earn the right to have complexity, and you need to maintain simplicity. So if I said, look, you want to be really careful, because if you're going B2B, that's one sales model, that's one interaction model, that's one kind of contract, that's one kind of channel, that's one kind of support. And then if you go B2C, that's a different channel, it's a different set of contracts, it's just different support. But if you try to go B2B and B2C, now you're more than doubling the work, because it's not like you're going to have two things. They intermingle with each other. So I talked about focus, and one of my favorite articles about focus was when I was 17 and I was trying to decide if I'm going to continue with figure skating or if I'm going to go to college, etc. I read an article called Living Like Weasels, which I think is beautifully written, and it transformed how I think about things, because at the essence of the story is that when a weasel bites its prey, its jaws lock, and there's like a tendon that won't release the weasel's bite unless the prey dies or the weasel dies, which is pretty profound. And so the author at the end of the article says, can you live your life like a weasel? Can you find that thing in your life that you can bite into, hang on to, latch onto, and hold on until you're done? And I said, when I was 17, I thought, that's cool. Because, when you're 17, you don't know as much. I said, that's cool. I want to live that way. And that's when I made the commitment to be the best skater I could be. And I became a vegetarian for 14 years. I wouldn't drink alcohol. I did a lot of things that tried to help me be the best athlete I could be. Now, of course, I enjoy a glass of wine and tequila. So what I've also learned is that when you're the weasel and you bite into something, that thing, if it's big enough, can bite you back, and it will take you on its journey. And that's what I talk about with innovation games and Conteneo. I bit into those, and it took me on this great journey, and it's done. And now I'm biting into profit streams. It's the new weasel thing. From my company, Applied Frameworks, we've focused the whole company on this. This is what and now we're going to start building some software around it. So I think it's important for people to try and focus. And it's interesting because, you'll see a lot in the modern world, like you have to have a hustle, or you have to have 3 jobs, or you have to have 5 income streams. Maybe, but sometimes really what you need to do is live like a weasel and latch into that thing and focus on it.
The last question is the identity capital question. So there are life lessons that only can be learned by doing, not from school or from a book. If time goes back, what would you tell your younger self?
I get this question every now and then of, if you could go back in time and you could give yourself advice, what advice would you give yourself? And if I ever did go back in time and I ever found my younger self, I would say, just do what you've done. Don't make any changes. See you later. Meaning, I am the person I am because of the choices I've made. And to go meta-reflective, if you will, I can't go back in time, because if I changed it, I wouldn't be here where I am now, and therefore the advice would change. Like, we can get into time paradoxes and future-oriented. So my feeling is, and it's really funny because I had a friend, Danny, who was over for dinner a few months ago, and my kids asked him that, and he's like, oh, I would go back and change this. And then Danny said, how come you're not asking your dad? And my kids all said, well, we know what he would say. Without asking him, he would say he wouldn't change a thing. And Danny goes, is that true? And I said, yeah, my kids know me. I wouldn't change a thing. I wouldn't change, because even the less desirable parts of my life, the painful parts of my life, they got me to where I'm at, and I wouldn't change that.
I listened to a podcast recently about Professor Abrams. He taught us at Stanford communication class. And in his last episode, he hosted two ladies. I forgot the name of the episode, but he said they were asking him about the guilt of making a mistake or feeling uncomfortable, and how it one of them, or her personality was she was haunted by this feeling. And what I get from your feedback is every pain is sometimes a setting stone that you can get on top of to the other horizon, and for your perspective to change. Luke, thank you for your time coming to the show. I truly enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you so much.
This was, of course, thanks to the Multiverse by Code for providing the space from Heart of Silicon Valley. Thank you for our listeners. This was Identity Capital. Thank you for tuning in.